Good morning. I'm still reporting on Trump's pick for Secretary of State. Yesterday, John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, met with President-elect Donald Trump regarding the position of Secretary of State. I think the general notion of Ambassador Bolton in the MSM is that he is a hawkish neocon. I've always liked Bolton. He never follows the herd because the depth of his knowledge of international affairs is so great. His views always take a very nuanced approach. Here's an example. I came down in support of taking out Saddam Hussein, despite the fact that I knew it would unbalance the entire Middle East.
We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
But so you still think he should be impeached?
I think it's my turn, isn't it?
You do whatever you want. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied.
Okay.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
That's why we've been in the Middle East for 15 years, and we haven't won anything. We've spent $5 trillion in the Middle East because of thinking like that.
For those of you who weren't old enough to have followed this on a day-to-day basis, here's a very important perspective that is completely lost from the MSM's overview of the roots of the war in Iraq. This from Saddam Hussein's Wikipedia entry. Saddam was notable for using terror against his own people. The Economist described Saddam as one of the last of the 20th century's great dictators, but not the least in terms of egotism or cruelty or morbid will to power. Saddam's regime brought about the deaths of at least 250,000 Iraqis and committed war crimes in Iran, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International issued regular reports of widespread imprisonment and torture. That's exactly right. That's the way I remember it. Beyond that, I had met a nurse and a doctor at a conference whom had served in Iraq during Saddam's reign, who discovered that Saddam had a very advanced chemical and biological weapons capability, and Saddam was spending lots of money for R&D in this area. They documented Saddam's chemical and bioweapons capabilities as clearly WMD, weapons of mass destruction. However, the MSM was strangely silent about Riley and Nicholson's attempts to inform the American public of the dangers of this issue. It's like they were supporting Saddam and trying to hide biological weapons development. As the U.S. Army entered Baghdad, it was clearly reported on Fox by Hannity for one day only that a convoy of trucks was spotted heading northwest into Syria. The theory is that this was Saddam's bioweapons R&D team.
People have been murdered over cartoons. End of moral analysis.
This, too, is now completely ignored, as the narrative is now that there was little justification for invading Iraq in the first place. So, although I was not a huge fan of U.S. intervention, I've always been mystified why this important piece of the puzzle is now totally ignored and even denied by the MSM. Although it seems clear today that involvement in Iraq was a mistake, what were we supposed to do? Support a dictator who ruled by throwing his opponents into trash-shredding machines?
We got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. He picked up a piece of paper and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
My point is that John Bolton's support for the Iraq War had significant justification. My point is that John Bolton's support for the Iraq War had significant justification that has been denied over and over again in the MSM as fictitious. He appeared on Tucker Carlson Tonight last night to explain his nuanced approach to matters of state.
Well, I think we've got to begin to treat Russia like the adversary that Putin is currently demonstrating it to be. I think that means going back into Poland and the Czech Republic and reestablishing our missile defense program.
Bolton's knowledge is wide and deep. He needs no notes to talk on a vast range of foreign affairs topics because he has spent his entire life not just learning about it, but hands-on dealing with it day to day. Many dismiss Bolton as a neocon and hawk and say he's not diplomatic enough to run the State Department.
I think John Bolton's a good man. I watched him yesterday, actually, and he was very good in defending me and some of my views, and very, very strong, and I've always liked John Bolton. Well, we are thinking about it, I will say that. We are thinking about it. I mean, the negative is what I told you, but we are seriously thinking about it.
Iran is the central banker of international terrorism.
We have gone full circle from opposing Al-Qaeda, which sent 3,000 Americans to a flaming death on 9/11, complete circle to where we now supply them, we arm them, we finance them, and it's all coming with the approval of the highest authorities in the United States government. There are no moderate rebels. The notion is a fantasy. They do not exist. And yet, I think yesterday, Secretary Kerry was out there saying, well, we've got to help the moderate rebels. The moderate rebels are Al-Qaeda, who flew the jets into the Twin Towers, and today, these are the moderates.
Right.
Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on the roots of the U.S. struggle against Islamic terrorism and why U.S. support for Israel is a must.
There have been reports that Israel has been treating wounded Syrian rebel fighters in its hospitals on the border, including fighters from Nusra Front, which is, of course, the Al-Qaeda proxy in Syria. Do those reports worry you that Israel's helping wounded Al-Qaeda-aligned fighters?
As I said before, in a different context, it's always useful also to deal with your enemies in a humane way. And I think that when you have people who are wounded and you can deal with them in a humane way, the considerations as to whether to take them in are not simply whether it's politically useful or whether it's politically
So it's purely humanitarian, you say? So there's no tactical or political strategic...
I didn't say there's no tactical. I said the main consideration, the immediate consideration is humane.
But the tactical issues involved, I mean, you know better than me the phrase blowback. You don't think there's going to be blowback against Israel if you get into bed with a group like Nusra Front?
No, I don't think so.
Would you also treat Hezbollah fighters?
No. I would not treat...
Have you not just contradicted what you told me 60 seconds ago about humanely treating your enemies?
No. I think as far as Hezbollah fighters are concerned, with them we have a different account.
So let me be clear, you're happy to treat Al-Qaeda fighters, but not Hezbollah fighters?
We have a different account with Hezbollah. Al-Qaeda, to the best of my recollection, has up to now not attacked Israel.
But it's attacked your number one ally and protector and sponsor, the United States of America. There is a quote-unquote war on terror being going on for 15 years.
ISIS fighters in Syria are about to topple the Assad regime. There's been almost zero coverage of this in the American media. The twist to this story is that Iran is about to send in 2 full divisions into Syria to attempt to hold off the fall of Assad. Or is the real motive to put 50,000 Iranians on Israel's northern border? Those who have followed this channel for many years may have noticed that I try to stay out of the gunfire lane between those who support the Palestinian cause and those who support Israel. Why? Because the arguments just become so complex you could waste away your entire life trying to figure out if Israel's latest response to a bunch of Palestinian knife attacks was justified or was it too much. There is no human way to divine the truth of which side on a particular day is right. So, on the ground level, there is no way to figure this out. But on the macro level, it's not hard at all. In Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, God provides His blessing on Abraham. Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. But now back to the descendants of Abraham's other son, Isaac. About 200 years after Isaac's birth, his son, Jacob, moved the clan into Egypt due to a severe drought in Canaan, about 1880 BC. At first, the Egyptians welcomed the Jews, but soon they worried that through their hard work, the Jews could end up taking over, so they enslaved them.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, you know, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. You know, I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there. And I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of, you know, that's a lot of myth there. And I don't think it's relevant.
But your grandfather was the founding, one of the founding fathers of the State of Israel?
Yes, he was.
Tell us about this.
Yes, he was. The generation of my grandparents was the generation of the first Jews to take on Zionism as an ideology and take on this idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he was very active. He became a leader within the movement. He was a member of the de facto Jewish government before the State of Israel was established. And he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence when the State of Israel was established.
So that would be, that you can make a contrast, like, let's say he was like the Abraham Lincoln or the, no, I'm sorry, George Washington. I'm sorry about that. Like a George Washington. Yes. Okay.
God reaffirmed the exact boundaries of Canaan to Moses in Numbers chapter 34 and reaffirmed his blessing on the Jews in Numbers chapter 24. The bottom line is that to most Christians this is clear biblical teaching, and as long as America continues to bless Israel, then God will continue to bless America. And when or if America ever turns its back on Israel, God will curse America. Unfortunately, that may have been going on now for nearly 8 years, and is exactly why we cannot afford another 4 or, God forbid, another 8 years of another opponent of Israel. One of the links was a congressional hearing which featured a Georgetown University professor named Michael Schur, who claims to have worked for the agency for a number of years as well. The guy is obviously brilliant, but has the same anger towards Israel that to me disqualifies him as being capable of rendering a reasonable, rational opinion that's worth listening to.
And I would certainly, if I was in charge, change many of the policies we have. But it's more important that we in this country become adults. Nothing a person does in his life doesn't have a counter reaction. Does our foreign policy motivate these people? Absolutely. Sir, if you're going to tell the American people they're fighting a war against a bunch of deranged, nihilist, fanatic extremists, we're going to be fighting a war that it's constantly going to surprise the American people about the costs of what they're doing. If we come to a place where we can have a discussion that says supporting Israel is essential to the U.S. security, supporting Saudi Arabia is important, vital to U.S. security, having U.S. troops in Muslim countries is vital to U.S. security, fine. But also tell the American people that costs come with that. Right now, we've spent 17 years in this war, and the American people still think we're fighting a bunch of long-haired, bearded, goat-eating madmen. And we're at a terrible disadvantage that we impose on ourselves, sir. And I would finish too long a statement by simply saying that we must stop the idiocy of democracy spreading. If it was up to me, I'd dump the Israelis tomorrow.
I know you would. I know.
But all I worry about is the continuing preaching of American politicians to the American people that our relationship with the Israelis doesn't cause us to have dead Americans and extraordinary expenses in fighting the Muslim world.
I would just say we would have more dead Americans if we didn't stand by our allies in the Middle East.
Well,
we'd just be encouraging al-Qaeda to take advantage of us. I think that
our allies in the Middle East are mostly totalitarians, sir, and they have been for 50 years.
There are not that many good people in the world. The fact is you have to work with those who work with us. And if I had the choice between dealing with the Israelis and al-Qaeda, I work with Israel. If I had the choice between dealing with Jordan or al-Qaeda, I'd deal with Jordan. And the fact is that you can find any number of excuses why al-Qaeda is going to come after us.
No, sir, you can't.
Yes, I think you can.
No, you can't, sir. They're not fighting us for what reason do you suppose they're going to come up with? Because we have Hollywood? I would like to fight Hollywood. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, they're not going to fight us because we have women in the workplace. That's an insanity. What they're fighting us about is what we do. And we don't have to stop what we're doing, sir. But we have to realize the cost.
And I think it'd be worse if we stop what we're doing, and that's my point.
Well, that's fine. Tell the American people that.
There's also, of course, what you're asking for, and I think that cost will be a lot greater.
I don't think so, sir. Well, it couldn't be worse than it is now.
We honestly disagree.
You know, you're presiding over a bankruptcy. What can be worse? And what has been the goal of al-Qaeda since it was formed? To bankrupt the United States. Who's winning today, sir? We're done like dinner.
We're winning, and we'll continue to win unless we take the advice of people like you.
Sir, you are exactly wrong.
Before I do that, I just want to mention this quickly. I find your position on our alliance with Israel as very troubling. It won't surprise you to tell you that I disagree with you. And you spent 17 years, is that right, or something like that, as a CIA analyst?
Over 20, sir.
Okay, over 20.
Not as an analyst. I ran operations, sir.
Okay. Are there, would you say there's a large number of CIA analysts or employees who agree with your position?
I wouldn't dare to speak for anybody but myself, sir. Well, only a fool would know that our relationship with Israel causes us war with Muslims.
Well, my question is fairly simple. I mean, you worked with hundreds of employees.
Yes, sir. I didn't work with any fools, sir.
I have spent significant time with many people from that region, and it is astounding to me that you don't put in the top 6 what I know to be true, and that is they are motivated, many of them are motivated by their absolute hatred of the United States and what we represent, whether it's freedom, whether it's democracy, whether it's women's rights. There are many of them who are absolutely motivated by that. I know that. I have talked with them.
They hate them, sir.
And I can't imagine that you would not put that in some.
They're not going to die for that, sir.
Oh, they absolutely have.
They have not, sir.
Well,
this war is not. It wouldn't have anything we have in this country.
You are turning a blind eye to history for you to say that they won't.
Bullshit, sir. You cannot. You don't need to call me professor either. You should call me Mike. The reality is, no one has blown themselves up because this young lady.
Professor, you're absolutely wrong on that. I'm going to move on now.
Well, no, you pulled this up. You said there's millions of people out there.
You're absolutely wrong on that. I'm going to move on if we could.
I wish you would move on.
Here's some numbers to consider. According to reports from our own U.S. government, reports of deaths from terrorism in the Middle East between 2002 and 2014 have increased 4,500%. But let's go a little bit deeper here. Take, for instance, just the country of Iraq. Before the 2003 U.S. invasion, do you know how many suicide attacks there were in Iraq? None. In the country's history, there had never been one. But since the 2003 invasion, there have been 1,892.
Professor Schur is not a person I would want to spend any time with. The Obama administration ordered the NSA to not just continue spying on Israeli intelligence in general, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his aides in particular, because they opposed the Iran nuke deal. As a result, conversations between Israeli officials and members of the U.S. Congress were included in the 2015 electronic spy net, a direct violation of the separation of powers concept, which is at the bedrock of the U.S. Constitution, clearly an impeachable act.
Israeli treachery continues. Dozens of Israeli spies have been caught in the United States since the Liberty attack. The most famous was Jonathan Pollard. Even according to the Jewish-descended Secretary of Defense at the time, Caspar Weinberger, the Pollard spy case was the most damaging spy case in the entire history of America. Pollard stole top-secret information on American intelligence operatives and agents in Eastern Europe. The Israelis, in a supreme act of treachery against America, sold their names to the Soviets. Israel directly caused the murder and torture of hundreds of our intelligence agents in Eastern Europe. Some spout that Israel's our only friend in the Middle East. A friend doesn't make terrorist attacks against you, doesn't kill your brave young men, doesn't spy on you and betray you. With a friend like that, you don't need any enemies, and the only reason we have enemies in the Mideast at all is because of support for the terrorist state of Israel, which has brutalized the Palestinians and other peoples in the Mideast for over half of a century. It is not in the American interest to support these Jewish terrorists, a small part of the population of the Mideast, and make enemies of nations with the energy resources so vital to America.
Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Some 6 years after Israel dealt with a massive fire in its northern Carmel region, a blaze which claimed 44 lives, Israel has yet again faced wildfires less than 2 weeks ago, which scorched large swathes of both forests and residential neighborhoods. The unseasonably dry weather and strong easterly winds helped kindle most of the fires.
This is the town of Nataf just outside of Jerusalem, and this is the area where firefighters are focusing their efforts now. This is where the fire remains out of control in the hills and the valleys around us. The fire swept through here earlier today. You can see this home behind me was damaged, as well as the home behind that. Scorched earth all along this hill here on the ground, burning the greenery and melting just about anything that's plastic, like what appears to be a pottery bowl right here behind me. The fire has then spread from this hill across the valley to the other hills, and that's because of the conditions here. It's supposed to be the rainy season, and yet we haven't seen rain in more than 2 weeks. It's dry. In addition to that, we've seen very windy conditions throughout the last couple of days, and those are expected to continue into the next couple of days. The dryness plus that wind is causing the fire to jump from one hill to another, and that is where firefighters are trying to stop the fire.
Yesterday, terrorists celebrated Thanksgiving Day in Israel by setting hundreds of wildfires as an act of war. On September 22nd, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the United Nations General Assembly. He pointed out the way the UN blatantly conspires to undermine Israel. He lays out fascinating facts that I have never heard before.
Year after year, I've stood at this very podium and slammed the UN for its obsessive bias against Israel. And the UN deserved every scathing word. For the disgrace of the General Assembly, that last year passed 20 resolutions against the democratic state of Israel, and a grand total of 3 resolutions against all the other countries on the planet. Israel 20, rest of the world 3. And what about the joke called the UN Human Rights Council, which each year condemns Israel more than all the countries of the world combined, as women are being systematically raped, murdered, sold into slavery across the world? Which is the only country that the UN's Commission on Women chose to condemn this year? Yep, you guessed it. Israel. And this circus continues at UNESCO. UNESCO, the UN body charged with preserving world heritage. Now, this is hard to believe, but UNESCO just denied the 4,000-year connection between the Jewish people and its holiest site, the Temple Mount. That's just as absurd as denying the connection between the Great Wall of China and China. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN, begun as a moral force, has become a moral farce.
I can imagine that in these centuries there is people that are slaves. They are buying them with money. You know, they're making them a test. If you got blue eyes, I will pay more money.